What is going on, guys? Miles here, and in this video we'll be checking out some posts from Michael Condrey over on the World War II subreddit, where he talks about the game and some possible changes which will be made to it. Let's do this. The Call of Duty community has been a little bit upset with Sledgehammer Games because there has been some pretty big issues with World War II really since the release of the game, and Sledgehammer Games have been pretty quiet about it. They haven't really been active with the community and talking about these issues and how they're going to resolve them, so the community is a little bit upset by that, pretty justifiably in my opinion, and as a result of it, Michael Condrey has started posting on the World War II subreddit where he sort of like talks about the thoughts of Sledgehammer Games and their plans for the future, which aren't exactly confirmed. He's talking about maybe some weapon changes, some new game modes, but this information isn't 100% confirmed, and Michael Condrey is sort of like asking the community what they think of these changes which Sledgehammer Games want to make, which is at least a step in the right direction. And I saw some people on Reddit actually flaming Michael Condrey about the things which he mentioned in these posts, but I think that's honestly a really bad idea, because you can tell him in a polite way about these changes and how you don't like them, but there's no need to flame him. He's trying to communicate with the community, and if you just flame him, then he's not going to do that anymore. So if you're posting on Reddit and flaming Michael Condrey, then I'd recommend not doing that, because they're just not going to communicate with us if you do so. So let's start off with the weapon changes which he mentioned. The first one is for the Kar98k, and he's considering a nerf to the aim down sights time for this weapon, and honestly I don't have an opinion of this weapon because I've barely used snipers in this game. I do think they're very powerful, coming from someone who keeps getting killed by them, but I haven't really used them myself, so I have no idea how powerful exactly they are. I just feel like they're quite strong in this game, so I'm not going to comment on that one, but if you have any ideas, let me know in the comments below. The next one is for the FG42, which recently did get a nerf in its fire rate, and that weapon kind of fell off, at least for me. I think it's quite poor post the patch, so they're considering buffing the fire rate just a little bit, so it's kind of in between where it is currently and where it is before the patch where it was super powerful, and I think that's a pretty good change overall. He also talks about the M1 Garand and says it's quite powerful in its current state, which I would agree with, and he mentions talking about how they may need to nerf the fire rate, possibly the pull-up time or the reload time for this weapon. Now, I don't really think this is necessary, to be honest. The M1 Garand is definitely the best semi-auto rifle in the game. I do feel like it's a lot better than the Gavir, the SVT, as well as the M1A1 carbine, but rather than nerfing the M1 Garand to the level of the other semi-auto rifles, I think they should buff the other semi-auto rifles, because currently they do feel quite underpowered and I don't really see a lot of people using them. And if you're going to use a semi-auto rifle, you may as well use the M1 Garand, and if you don't like the M1 Garand, then I wouldn't recommend using any other semi-auto rifle, because the other ones do seem to be pretty poor. So I think Sledgehammer Games should buff the other semi-auto rifles in different ways, rather than nerfing the M1 Garand. And finally, Sledgehammer Games are considering buffing the SG44 to make it on par with the other rifles in the game. And I'm a huge fan of the SG44, but honestly I think it's in a pretty good state right now. It's not the best rifle in the game, but it's definitely not the worst either, and you can definitely use it and you won't be at a huge disadvantage to someone using another weapon in the game. So despite me loving the SG44, I think it's in a really good state and it doesn't need to be buffed. Moving on to the game modes which Michael Condrey made a post on yesterday. In this post he talks about Ground War, which a lot of the community have been wanting. Personally, I'm not too bothered about Ground War. I didn't really play it in many of the older Call of Duties, but I don't really have a problem with it being added to the game if the community does want it. Michael Condrey mentions how the maps were developed for a 6v6 game mode rather than a 9v9 game mode, which is Ground War, so the spawns and stuff on these maps would be pretty chaotic in a 9v9 Ground War scenario, and that's why Ground War hasn't been added to Call of Duty World War II currently. He does mention how Sledgehammer Games were going to develop a couple of maps specifically for Ground War, but they ran out of time in the development cycle and thus they were scrapped, and Ground War is currently not in the game. So he doesn't really mention whether Ground War will be added to COD World War II at a certain point, but I think if the community mentions it enough, then he will add it into the game, which, like I said, I'm not too bothered about, but if the community wants it, then it's probably a good thing. He also mentions that adding new game modes into Call of Duty World War II, such as Infected, will increase the time it takes to find a match no matter what game mode you're playing, and that's why Sledgehammer Games is quite skeptical on adding new game modes into multiplayer. And the final thing he mentions is that they are working on a big in-game event, but he didn't really mention much about it. We don't know when it's going to come out, and he does say that they will reveal more details in the future, so I'm guessing this is going to be similar to Winter Siege, where they'll add a bunch of DLC weapons and a bunch of new supply drop items and stuff like that. And I thought the Winter Siege event overall was pretty fun, and I would like to see another one in the game, but I'm not exactly sure what the theme would be. Currently the only one I can think of is the Shamrock event from like Modern Warfare Remastered, which celebrated St. Patrick's Day, but that was around like mid-March or so, which is quite far away, so I'm not exactly sure if that is what the event is going to be based around, but we'll find out fairly soon. But that just about sums up all of the posts which were recently made by Michael Condrey over on the World War II subreddit. Let me know what you think of these down in the comments below. What do you think of the weapon changes and the whole game mode situation? And if you have any ideas of the upcoming event, also let me know in the comments. And if you found this video useful, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more Call of Duty, but I'll see you guys in my next video.